The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Carly Wiltsey with ICA, and I will be your presenter today for the Data into Dollars training. This training is a part of the DCEO and ICA collaboration training series. This is actually a training that we did in person just last month, but we have shifted it to an online training due to the circumstances right now. So I hope everyone is staying healthy and safe during this time. And just a few things before we get started. We have all attendees muted right now, and everyone will remain muted through the webinar today. Christine Westerland is on the webinar today also, and she's going to help look for any questions that come through the chat box. So then we can unmute you if you'd like to ask any questions. We encourage you to do so. So the webinar today will be recorded, and we will email it out to all attendees to share with other staff that maybe couldn't attend today. And then you can use the chat box, like I said, to ask any questions or share comments and that sort of thing. So we will go ahead and get started.
Hey, Carly.
Yeah.
This is Christine for everyone. Just a reminder that there is a survey that will pop up at the end of this webinar. So we would really ask you to send to that survey for us. We need to have your input to help us with our future webinar planning and content. And Carly, I will probably mute myself when I can. And then if questions pop up, I will make sure that I get your attention.
Okay, that sounds great.
Thanks.
Thanks for the reminder about the survey.
Sure.
Okay, so looking at the learning objectives for today, we're going to talk about how data in your agency can be collected, aggregated, analyzed, and applied. So we're going to discuss the differences between data, information, and knowledge. We're also going to identify key data analysis techniques that you might use and how data analysis can be used to turn data into information. We are also going to recognize the uses of information to create knowledge for improvement of agency capacity and results, and recognize the need to identify steps to establish data collection processes at your agency. So looking at data, information, and knowledge. So data is going to be facts that are observed, measured, collected, and aggregated. So the data is only going to become information for decision making once it has been analyzed in some fashion. So once you've used some of those data analysis techniques to make that data become information. And then that knowledge is derived from the information and interaction with experience with the topic. And we'll provide some examples here in a couple slides to kind of understand more the differences between these three things. So then, as we all know, there's two different types of data. So there's quantitative data, and then there's qualitative data. So quantitative data, this is going to answer the what, where, how, when, and who, whereas qualitative data is going to answer the why. And that qualitative data piece is really, really important. So this is going to be based on opinions and experiences, and this is going to be more of that story that's going to back up the quantitative data, which is more based on numbers, statistical analysis, closed-ended questions, whereas the qualitative data is going to be based off of interviews and observations and open-ended questions. So then just to look at some examples here, so quantitative data is going to be demographic data. It's going to be presented in numbers. It's going to be clear and specific. And some examples might be your height, or the temperature outside today, or the number of pets you have. Whereas qualitative data is going to provide you with opinions and observations. So this is going to be more descriptive data and data that can be collected through participant observations and interviews. Some examples of qualitative data might be a color of a house, a texture of a shirt, or a smell of a perfume. So then looking at the differences here between data, information, and knowledge, looking at an example at your agency. So the data piece might possibly be demographic data about a client, whereas the information, after that demographic data is analyzed, it becomes information. So is there a pattern or trend? Is it a single parent? Are they ages 20 to 35? Is it a family with young children from a particular area of town? So these are just some questions to ask yourself from that demographic data. So after you've analyzed that demographic data about a client, what information can you come up with? Was there a particular trend that you found? Was there some comparative analysis methods that you used to compare that demographic data with something else? And then looking at the knowledge piece, for example, so considered with experience at operating a Head Start program, we recognize that there had been a shift in population, and we are now serving families who have an older head of household, fewer children, and a larger percept with a high school diploma. So then looking at changing the way we think about data collection. So that's something that we want to keep in mind today throughout the webinar. So it's important to change our mindset from we collect data for reporting purposes to we collect data to help manage and support the agency's programs and services and determine if we make a difference in our clients' lives and in their communities. So try to think of this kind of mindset change as we go through today's training.
Yeah, Carly, can I kind of interject something here, please?
Yeah.
I just want to remind all of you, this is not going to be a Roma training by any means, but this is really at the heart of what Roma is, results-oriented mindsets. And because we really want to help manage and support agency programs and decide that difference and report on that difference that we're seeing in that client's life and within the communities as well. So this is where, I guess in a sense, rubber meets the road. We do collect data for reporting purposes, right? But it is so far deeper than that. And this is where the data into dollars also tells our story. So if we have the capacity to dive into this story, imagine what that would sound like to our funders, and that they're really hearing and listening in and understanding our results about people who they probably care about. So that is one spin to put on it.
Yeah, that's a great addition, Christine.
Thanks.
So then looking at the analysis of raw data. So this is going to be facts, figures, and stories that's going to be turned into useful information for decision making at your agency. So this data analysis is going to include inspecting and cleaning data with goals of discovering useful information. So this is, you're hoping for those suggested conclusions to support your decision making. So in an example that I'll kind of give of an example of cleaning the data. So if the memo that NASCAS sends out in response to submission of the annual report. So it can include, asking about missing data points or things that seem out of the expected range. So trying to figure out, where they got these conclusions, where they got these decision making, what supported their decision making, and trying to find out if there are missing data points or if there There are things that seem out of the expected range, and asking those questions. So, keeping in mind that asking questions about data is very, very important, because that's going to help you dig deeper into that data, and that's going to help you with analyzing that data to become information and help with decision making. So then, looking at the different data quality attributes. So if you're reading this chart here, you want to read it in a way where you're moving from complete to accurate, then to timely, and then to reliable. So the first thing that we're going to check for is missing data. So if you don't have some elements of data, your analysis could be incomplete, or even worse, it could be wrong, right? So then next you're going to look at the accuracy, or I'm sorry, making sure the data is accurate. So accuracy is about making sure there are no typos and that the data is all correct. So if a client in the data system is marked as homeless, is he or she really homeless? Just clarifying on those data pieces. And then next, looking at, is the data collection being done in a timely manner? So is it being collected on a regular basis, on a day-to-day basis? And then, is the data up to date? And is it reliable? So reliability includes the understanding that data collection process is being uniformly applied to the entire population that's being served. And then asking, is it consistently collected in a standard way as a regular part of the work done? So is the data trustworthy? And does it make sense? Are you able to look at the data and pull out ideas and information from it? So does it make sense to you? And then one other thing to add here. So the quality of your data, you want to think of it in a way as the quality is the foundation upon which analysis will be built on. So then just asking, is the data accurate and complete? I think this is a cute little comic strip type thing here. It says in the first box, I'm filling out a reader survey for Chewing Magazine. See, they asked how much money I spend on gum each week. So I wrote $500. For my age, I put 43. And when they asked what my favorite my favorite flavor is, I wrote garlic curry. And then in the third box, this magazine should have some amusing ads soon. I love messing with data. So just a funny little comic strip to throw in. And then remembering that flawed data characterized as incomplete, inaccurate, not timely will lead to faulty decisions. So making sure that the quality of your data is the foundation to build on the analysis of the data. And then just something to keep in mind for today throughout the webinar, thinking about your own practices, and make a list of things you want to pursue to improve the quality of the agency's data collection and storage processes at your agency where you work at. And then asking, what do you want to know? So there must be a purpose for the data. So before you're beginning to collect, store, and analyze data, you must know what you want to use the data for. And then looking at, what data do you collect? So who does the data collection at your agency? How do they do data collection? Is it on paper? Is it on a computer? Is it at the office, in the field, etc.? And then what do they do with the data after they collect it? So is it put in a paper file? Is it entered into a database? Are they bringing it to someone else to enter, possibly like a data entry person? And then asking, how is the data stored at the agency? So just a short little activity here, just to get us thinking about this. So I encourage you to either use, like a piece of paper, or if you want to pull up a Word doc on your laptop and split the paper into 2 columns. So on one side, write who, and then on the other side, write what. And I want you to think about your agency and who at your agency collects data, and then what kind of data they're collecting. So this is just to kind of get our brains thinking. I'll provide some examples before we kind of begin this. So, it might be, maybe you're going to write down a case manager. They are the who. And then for the what, maybe they collect, let's see, some demographic information or referral information or service information. So that would be the types of data they collect. Whereas maybe a different staff member at the agency, like a, like a fiscal officer, maybe they collect bills paid or funds received. And then maybe even at a supervisor level, in a supervisor position, maybe they're collecting data of workers' timesheets. So it can be, it can be a large range of differences here. So let's just take a few minutes to jot down who collects data at your agency and what kind of data they collect. And then if anyone would like to share any examples, that would be awesome. We can unmute you if you'd like to talk, or we can, or you can type in the chat box. So we'll take just a few minutes here to jot down some staff who collect data at your agency.
So Carly, you've got a couple of answers that have come in here. One is Carrie. I believe she is from Madison County. Case managers collect services proved. I'm assuming you mean probably provided, Carrie, for a quarterly report. And then
Okay,
Tariq,
right.
yeah. Then Tariq, who is from DuPage, writes, we manage a resource database online where we have records for service providers. Over 1,000 records is at present. We collect information on services provided, intake information, eligibility criteria, documentation, requirements, program fees, and etc.
Okay, great. Thanks for sharing. And then another thing, after you've been able to jot down who is responsible for collecting data and what type of data they're responsible for collecting at the agency, let's think about how the data is collected and then how it's stored. So how is the data stored at the agency, and how is the data collected? And then if anyone would like to share that information as well, that would be awesome.
Yeah, and Carly, just to add to the previous question, another answer came in from Andrea. Property managers collect income certifications, demographics, salary verifications, unit availability, maintenance records, and waiting lists.
Great. Thanks for sharing, Andrea. I'll add too, I think sometimes when we think about what type of data is collected at the agency, our minds kind of focus in on program data, you know, program and service data, but there's so much more data that's collected at the agency, you know, whether it's, like I mentioned earlier, you know, even employee timesheets or bills paid, funds received. There's really so much more. I mean, I'm sure if you really think about it, there's probably data that's being collected by almost every employee at the agency in, you know, in some type of way.
So we have had an answer come in from Andrea. It says this data is primarily collected through paper applications. The client data is highly private, therefore it is stored in files within locked fireproof cabinets for privacy purposes.
Okay, good.
And Carly, can I just add a note of Roma into this, please?
Yes, absolutely.
So whenever, and one thing I know that we don't use a lot in Illinois is the logic model. But one thing to consider, because in the Roma logic model that we use, it asks these very same questions. The last 3 columns on the Roma logic model does ask, you know, where is this information kept? What type of things are you collecting? How often do you do it? So I think those are really critical questions if we want to report good, clean data to the state, but not just, it goes beyond just providing data to the state. This informs your operations, and I know you're going to talk about this as you move forward. But just, it's critical on the front end that you really think through how you manage your data. Where is it kept at? How are we doing this? Are we doing it the right way? Can we access it? And to be very thoughtful about that process.
Yeah, most definitely. Any other comments that have came through, Christine? If not, I will move on.
I don't see any more.
Okay. Okay, and we already kind of touched on this, but just looking at who has the data. So identifying who has the data that would tell you what you want to know. And then how is the data shared? So who gets to see the data? Excuse me, who gets to see the data? And this might be, you know, this might be data that's shared with funders, or even just program reports within the agency. So who identifying who has the data that would tell you what you want to know. If you had a question about some specific data, who could you contact at the agency to dive deeper into that? to get your answers. And then looking at storing the data. So the data should be stored in a safe yet accessible place. So like Andrea gave an example, you know, the personal information is kept in file cabinets that are locked. So that, you know, that's a very safe place for that data to be stored. So there should be a procedure and policy in place stating who can access the data. So a procedure and policy you know, manual is a really great thing to have implemented at the agency. And then asking the question, who has access to the stored data internally and externally? So these are both really important pieces. So internally, is it the board? Is it administration level staff? Is it program supervisors? Is it direct service staff? And then externally, is it funders, elected officials, partners, individuals we are serving, or the general public? So in the analysis of the data, we want to establish what you want to know. So is this driven by internal or external reporting requirements? Want to identify who has the data necessary to tell you what you want to know, and be sure to know where the data is located. Agency programs, input from clients, community statistics. And then just making sure to ask the right questions. So like we discussed earlier, the most important first step to analyzing data is asking the right questions. So did we do what we thought we would do? Did we serve the population we thought we would serve? Did we make an impact on the identified needs? Can we tell what services or set of services produce the best opportunity for results? Are some populations achieving outcomes at different rates than others? Did we recruit and enroll sufficient numbers to allow us to achieve our target outcomes? Do we need additional resources? And was there something unexpected that influenced the outcomes? So these are just some questions to keep in mind, very important questions as that first step to analyzing data. So then aggregating the data. So this is where we're going to combine the data to understand the big picture. So just considering what type of data to aggregate. It might be population characteristics. It might be well-being indicators. It might be economic indicators or other. So looking at the different techniques for data analysis. So these are 4 popular techniques of data analysis. The first one that we're going to talk about is the count technique. Then we're going to talk about comparison. Then we're going to talk about factor analysis, so identifying the factors. And then lastly, trend analysis, so considering the trends. So looking at the count technique. Basically in this technique, it's pretty self-explanatory. We're counting, right? We're counting something. So how many did something, or how many of a certain characteristic, or how many were successful, or how many responded in a certain way. So we're going to be counting something. So what are you counting? Maybe the number of individuals and families served, maybe the number of services delivered, or maybe the number of outcomes achieved by those receiving services. And then you'll want to know if the numbers you have produced are good. In some cases, funding sources will only be looking for your counts. But however, with a results orientation, the Community Action Network also wants to know what the count means. So not just what are the numbers. You know, they want to know what's behind the numbers. So what comes from that analysis of those numbers that you're providing to the funding sources? Really telling that story through the data. So both that quantitative and qualitative data.
Carly, if I may.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just to kind of put an exclamation point on exactly what you just said. What you said was absolutely perfect. Historically, we've really looked more at outputs, you know, the number of people who enroll in a program or who have participated in a program, and that's what we became very accustomed to historically reporting on, and that time is now past us. So, you know, and I know that many of you know this already on this webinar today, and many of your colleagues know it as well. But oftentimes we hear that default button, or push that default button, I should say, because we simply just start counting noses again. And so this results orientation is really, diving deeper into that story. When you say, tell me what happened, you know, does it match with what our mission statement says? Are we doing what we say we're going to do? So I'll turn it back over.
Yeah. Thanks, Christine, for your input.
Sure.
And then, so looking at, next we're going to look at comparing the data. So that comparison technique. So this technique has many different approaches. So you can compare a lot of different things. So you can compare the actual program data with the projections you made at the beginning of the year. So asking how many projected to serve, how many were actually served, how many projected to achieve an outcome, not an output, an outcome, and then how many actually achieved the outcome. And then you can also compare program data from year to year. So quantity of service, population served, cost of the program, and then outcomes achieved. And then some other comparisons might be local data to national data, comparing within the community needs assessment, and then comparing your data with other agencies. So within the community needs assessment, maybe you're going to look back at your assessment data. So remember what you identified about the needs, and then asking yourself if you impacted those needs. And then with comparing your data to other agencies, you could possibly look at what do other agencies who have similar outcomes achieve? So how are their services delivered? And how do they compare to your service delivery? And are the populations similar? So just some questions to keep in mind when you're comparing your data to others. And then looking at comparing with other providers. So just an example here, if we assisted 100 people in getting a job, is that good? So what, you know, diving a little bit deeper, what do we mean by assisted? What do other agencies who have employment as an outcome achieve? How is employment defined? Do they have to hold a job for, you know, so many days? So looking deeper into that definition of employment. Are the populations similar with that other provider? And then how might differences in population impact differences in outcomes? So we really want to consider what impact your program has that you're offering. And then the third technique we're going to talk about is factor analysis. So This is a tool for investigating relationships for complex concepts. So factor analysis can be somewhat a confusing concept, but we're really just looking at the basics of what influences the situation we are trying to change and what is behind the need that we've identified. So examine elements to determine how or if they are related. Multiple observed variables are tracked to see if they have similar patterns of responses because they are all associated with a complex concept. So an example of that, if we collect data about income, education, and occupation, which are all different data elements, they're all associated with the same overarching principle, which is socioeconomic status. So thinking of factor analysis in this way, elements that are highly related, and this can be positive or negative, are likely influenced by the same factors, while those that are relatively unrelated are likely influenced by different factors. And then lastly, looking at trend analysis. So identifying the trend, analyzing longer term trends and identifying patterns. This involves the collection of data from multiple time periods and plotting it on a graph for further review. So are things changing or are they staying the same? This might be demographics, opportunities for employment, environmental changes, availability of healthcare professionals, facilities and systems. So we're collecting information and attempting to spot a pattern or trend in the information. So this is often used to predict or forecast future events, but it can also be used to explain past events. So looking here at an example, this is a trend of United States teen pregnancy rate. So if we're looking at, and this is just an example of a graph where there were some plotted data points here that I was going to use. So if we look at this graph, the US teen pregnancy has decreased over the years. As you can see, the trend is decreasing. So when using this trend analysis, it is useful to look at data over multiple years. So you can plot a trend for what you expected to do or for what you did, and then looking back at how well did you plan, or even targeting the number to be served and the number to achieve an outcome. So with trend analysis, it's really important to look at and really useful to look at data over multiple years, because maybe, I know this graph is about 10 years old now, but if we were looking at, let's just say we're back in 2010 and we're looking at the US teen pregnancy rate in 2010, well, one might say it was really high in 2010. But then when we look at the rate over multiple years, so past years, then we can identify information that tells us the rate has actually decreased. So then looking at trend data truly is the best way to make projections about how many you will serve and how many will achieve an outcome. So did the number of people served stay the same over the past few years, or are there annual fluctuations? So if there are differences, what caused those differences? And of the people served in prior years, how many achieved the expected outcome, and how stable is that number over time? So when we're thinking of some causes and differences, so this could possibly be a change in funding. So maybe there's been a change in priority of one or more of your funding sources, or maybe there is more or less funding available. And then some other examples too might be a change in the circumstances of the community. So maybe there's new populations that are in need. Maybe there are new employment opportunities. A loss of a major business are some possibilities that could be causes. So then after we've identified the analysis techniques, we want to talk about reporting the data. So like we mentioned earlier, reporting the data internally and externally. So it's important to know where you are starting from if you want to set a path forward. So like we said earlier, asking, why are we collecting this data? What do we want to know? And then looking at how useful your current reports are. So we're going to do a little activity, and we'll go through the next few slides together, and I'll read each question. But what we're going to do is we're going to assess your existing management reports at your agency. So we're going to go through this assessment tool, and there's going to be 20 statements, and they're going to cover the areas of quality of data, presentation of the data, usefulness of the data, and then the performance focus. Oops. Sorry, I meant to add. So when we go through this, these questions, you're going to check the box that to which you agree or disagree with each statement as it pertains to the management reports that you currently receive or can access at your agency. And if you don't know about the reports at your agency, you can select the last column that gives an option of I don't know. So I hope everyone can read this okay. And I will send out these documents. When we send out the recording of the webinar, I'll also send out the PowerPoint slides and the documents that we use for the activities in today's webinar, so that you can you can transfer over your answers to that as well. So we're going to assess your existing management reports. If you look at the chart here, the first column, I'll just read through each question, and then you can check on your end if you just want to number 1 through 20, and then you can check on your end to which you agree. So number 1, reports are easy to read. There are graphs or tables with clear labels. Number 2, data are summarized in categories that are useful to me. Number 3, reports properly emphasize performance as evidenced by layouts and availability of information pertaining to outcomes. Number 4, the amount of data provided is adequate. Number 5, the frequency of data is adequate. Number 6, reports present data over time so I can see trends. Number 7, I can access the data on my own without waiting for a report from IT or another department. Number 8, the report data helps me understand who we are serving. Number 9, the report data helps me understand the kinds of service that customers are receiving: single service, multiple services, comprehensive set of services. Number 10, the report data helps me understand the quantity of service that customers are receiving: intensity, frequency, and duration of the service or services. Number 11, data is provided on the extent to which outcomes are being achieved. Number 12, outcome data is connected to the NPIs and to our agency strategic plan. Number 13, data is grouped to identify staff or units that have produced the service and/or outcomes in the report. Number 14, reports provide goals or expected levels of performance so I can compare actual with expected. Number 15, reports enable me to analyze the impact of a number of factors: staff, customer demographics, customer goals, etc., on each specific outcome measure. Number 16, data is not grouped, so I end up creating a spreadsheet for the parts I want to look at more closely. Number 17, I get monthly fiscal data that is directly related to the programs I supervise. If I supervise multiple programs or units, the data is separated for ease of analysis. Number 18, reports connect budget allocations and expenses to actual performance of service or observation of outcomes. Number 19, the reports are provided timely, soon after the actual performance of service or observation of outcome. And number 20, data provided in reports is accurate and can generally be trusted. Okay, so like I said, I'll send out that document, that Word document, in an email to you all later this evening or tomorrow morning, and I'll also include the score sheet to this activity. So this was an activity in document that was created by Barbara Mooney, and it's a part of the Roma Next Gen series. And she did share that they have tested this set of statements and have found that most middle managers in an agency agree or strongly agree with only about 40% of the items identified. So depending on where you are in the agency's hierarchy, you may have more or less access to the system. Any questions on that activity, you can type in the chat box if you would like. So then looking at what are some next action steps. So are there some areas where your reports could be changed to provide more information? And this will be a little bit easier once I get these Word documents to you to look over. But these are just some things to keep in mind after scoring your activity. So I already said, are there areas where reports can be improved? And then can the presentation be improved of the report? So the presentation of the reports. And then who in the agency and or board should have access to the reporting? Does anyone, just to kind of debrief from the activity, does anyone want to share any next action steps or any comments or ideas?
I don't see anything popping up, Carly. I'll keep my eye open.
Okay, that is fine. We will move along. So then next we're going to talk about mapping data collection processes within the agency. So this is very, very important. And this, this is to identify the path and flow of information at your agency, service delivery and customer interaction, and we can create a roadmap for doing so. So this might look like a logic model, a flow chart, or other program mapping graphics. And then looking at your process maps. So I'm going to give an example here in a few slides of a flow chart that we can all take a look at to compare how things flow in your agency. And that will be, I think, helpful to everyone. So then you're looking at mapping. So this is a great way to focus attention and to capture and frame knowledge to facilitate sharing of ideas and concepts. So mapping can be used for many, many different things: brainstorming, problem solving, planning, reflecting, and visualizing. So this is a sample flow chart of client and information flow, and this was created by the Nevada State CSBG office. And I think it's a really great example. The partnership typically uses this as an example in a lot of their data analysis presentations. And so I want you to take a look at this flow chart I know it's a little bit hard to see, but I will also send this to you in that email that I'm going to send at a later date. And so taking a look at this, consider your own flow of information at your agency. So take a few minutes to look at this, and then some questions to ask yourself. How is this similar to what your agency does? Or how is it different? And then, is the process of collecting data in your agency written down somewhere? Or is it not written down anywhere? So let's take a few minutes to take a look at this. And if you want to jot down some maybe similarities or differences, or any comments or ideas that come to mind, and feel free to share anything in the chat box.
Hey, Carly, just if I may, with the prior activity, the assessment that you went through, we had a reflection that came in on that from Andrea.
Okay.
I used the activity to think about a new grant that we have received and are just beginning to implement it. I expected it to be mostly disagrees, which it was, but it gives me a lot of good ideas on how to set up the additional reporting under this funding source to make my reporting meaningful for our funders, our board, and our planning purposes. Thanks.
Awesome.
And I'll keep my eye open to see if anything else comes in.
Okay. We'll just take a couple minutes here to take a look, you know, and really look at where the initial contact starts, and then where that information's flowing, and what staff are in charge of, you know, performing those tasks. So maybe it's, you know, creating a goal plan, or monitoring that plan. So take a close look, and we'll, I'll stop talking for a couple of minutes, and then we will regather. Has anything came in the chat box, Christine?
Not that I can tell.
Okay. It's a little different doing activities over a webinar, because I can't really see when folks are done writing down ideas. So I apologize if I am moving on too quickly, but Christine, nothing else in the chat box? If not, we'll move on.
I don't see anything.
Okay. We can always come back to this if questions come up moving forward. So then looking at processes in writing. So to establish quality data collection processes, it is helpful to have this written down somewhere. So a written process that has written down steps so that everyone within the agency understands that what they collect is important to the entire agency data system. So next we're going to look at a guide to data policy development, and there are a couple of examples in the first two rows here. And so in this guide, it asks the questions: who collects the data? What data elements are collected? Looking at the process, how is the data collected? Where is it stored? Why it's collected? And then who needs to see the data, and how is it retrieved from storage? So here's just a couple examples looking at the receptionist and then the case manager. So everyone take a look at this, and if you want to begin to map out the information flow at your agency, that's great. But I will also send this in a Word document to you all. So there will be many attachments in the email I send out. So it'll include all of these documents that we've looked at today on the webinar, and then it'll also include the recording and the PowerPoint slides. I did realize today, which I will know for future webinars that we do, that I can actually upload handouts onto the GoToWebinar platform. So that will be really helpful for next time. That way all the participants can just retrieve those documents from their little dashboard. So it's a learning process. So I will make that note for next time. So then looking at what we have learned. So we've learned that analyzing and applying data is essential to sustainability. Ongoing monitoring is also essential, and monitoring should be built in early, involve people at all levels of the organization. Great sentence to highlight. And give leadership the ability to quickly take corrective action or move to build on success. So then looking at agency capacity, when we're looking at all the staff involved in the data collection or analysis process, so does the agency have the proper tools to engage in proper data collection, storage, and analysis? An important aspect of agency capacity lies with the agency staff. So are the staff properly informed, assigned, and equipped? So do they need some type of training? Do they provide services of high quality that meet the needs of the clients? So identifying those needs within agency staff. And then when applying the data analysis techniques, like we talked about earlier, we want to get to the answers of what happened, who changed, what services or strategies produced the change, and how do you know? What services produce the outcome or results? How can we track the multiple services connected to each client? Who achieved the results? What was the age, income level, and income source of those who achieved? Or what was their education level? Did the individuals who achieved one outcome achieve any others? Or how many individuals achieved multiple outcomes? So all of these things can be identified through data analysis and the techniques that we discussed earlier. And then just something to really focus on, we have to know if what we are doing is addressing the identified needs in the community and if the people we serve are making progress towards self-sufficiency. And then looking at how you rate your agency's performance. So did your service work? How well did it work? Can you do it again next year? And this plays into the trend analysis that we discussed earlier, where you can, or I'm sorry, I spoke wrong. Compare analysis that we discussed earlier, where you can compare your services to another agency's services, or even comparing the data from year to year. So how well did it work last year? How well did it work this year? And then you can identify that trend. So was there a trend? Was there a pattern in the data from year to year? And then what factors play a role? So can you do it again next year? What are some things that you might need to change? And then looking at accountability data. So are we as an agency focused on changing lives? Are we following up to show the long-term impact of our work? Can we see what needs to be done next year to expand? And can we tell what set of services give the best opportunity for results? So then thinking about your next community needs assessment. So what do you want to collect data about that you haven't before? Was anything missing from your previous data collection efforts? Are you getting the right data? And then what else do you want to know? And then keeping in mind that the information that we have discussed today should really help you look at the way that you do an assessment of needs. So are we following up with clients after goal setting? If we are following up, how are we following up, and are we tracking this somewhere? Without follow-up, how can we report and tell our agency story? The evaluation phase has to take place in order to make changes, new discoveries, new opportunities, and identify successes. Some data tips moving forward. So how to discuss data more in your agency. Regularly discuss data. Where do you want to go and how will you get there? Maybe data is discussed in a staff meeting. Having data-focused discussions within each program area. Each program tells a part of the agency's overall story. Therefore, there should be discussions within each program area on data. And then to provide some good examples looking at past data. Also making sure that all staff are aware of their expectations of data within the agency and that they have the tools, training, and support to do so. Having good quality comprehensive data can be hard, but the data is what really tells your story and what really tells folks what you are doing as an agency. And just some final tips here, making sure that all staff within your agency know why you are collecting data and making this a priority for everyone to be informed. The partnership suggests creating a policy and procedure manual for data collection and analysis so that within all agency staff, there will be consistency with data practices. Creating a data map that demonstrates how information should move through the organization so that all staff members are following the same process. So then what are some next steps from the group? Does anyone have any questions or comments? Feel free to type in the chat box, or you can even raise your hand and we can unmute you.
Carly, I'll start the conversation.
Okay.
I think one of the key pieces to good data collection is, as you said, you have to have that really great data collection in place, that planning in place, doing those assessments. This is also where the Roma professional plays a key role. And this is where having an embedded Roma implementer and an embedded Roma trainer at your agency really builds that data team. So you have you have the capacity to train about what data is important, qualitative versus quantitative, using tools like the logic model and scales to really get at the heart of what your customers are needing and how they're moving through the programs that you offer and how you connect it to mission. So it's vital for us to tend to this. Years and years ago, Roma was not considered to be the rule. It was just a tool, but that is very different today. And so just to put that out there, to have you kind of ponder it and think about it from the perspective of this is a whole agency approach to gathering and using data. And the Roma professional can help you do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's really important to keep in mind. And that Roma professional can play a huge role in in identifying key staff in the process of data collection, and kind of mapping that out for the agency as a whole of how the data flows, where it's stored, who's responsible for what, and then informing those staff members of why they're collecting that data, to make that work meaningful, so they can understand why that data is being collected and why it's so important for that data to be accurate and to be timely, and keeping all of those really important things in mind.
Absolutely. I think the more that we have a willingness to dive into data, and I think also overall at the agency to understand that everybody does play a role in data collection, data analysis, data use, and how we can help all of you try to understand it from a deeper perspective.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't see any questions coming in, Carly.
Okay. All right. Well, all I have left is just some some resources here, and then my email and phone number. If you have any questions, you can also any questions related to Roma or becoming a Roma professional, those can be directed towards Christine Westerland. And like I said earlier, this webinar is being recorded and will be sent out to all of the attendees, as well as the PowerPoint slides and any documents that I discussed today. I'll also attach those. And I think that that is all I have. I hope that everyone is staying well. I know that the working from home has been an adjustment for me. I hope that you cannot, it hasn't been too distracting. There's a new house being built next door, and so I can hear the, you know, they're working on it, hammering and all of that. So I hope that that has not been a distraction to anyone. And if so, I do apologize. And then just want to thank you all for listening in today. And if no other questions, then we will.
There's a comment, Carly,
Okay.
and this is from Andrea. She writes, I love the way that you began this session, that you begin with the end in mind. Knowing that the better your ability to tell the agency story and support that narrative without quantitative support, the better off our ability to secure money will be.
Great. Thanks, Andrea. Okay. Well, if we don't have any other questions or comments, I think that we will conclude today's webinar. Thank you all for attending, and I hope that you all have a nice evening.
Take care, everybody.